Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing Radlands from Roxley Games. And Radlands is a lane battling experience, two players going head-to-head as they attempt to take out each other's bases in these 3 lanes. You have 3 bases on each side, you have 3 lanes, you're trying to play cards to your rows in order to effectively take out your opponent's bases before they take out yours. Now, the core gameplay loop is fairly simple, all covered on this little player aid. There is a rulebook. This will give you 90% of what you need to know, as you start off each round by advancing any events that are in play. If these raiders are in play, or if you played any other events, they advance from row 3 to row 2 to row 1, at which point they resolve. So let's go ahead and pretend these raiders are in play. This one's not in play. We'll go ahead and move this raider up, so now it's in row 1. Next turn, it'll go ahead and resolve. From there, you go ahead and add 3 water to your reserve, as well as drawing a card from the central deck. This is a shared deck. All players have access to the same exact deck, the same exact cards. It's what you do with them that will determine if you win or lose. From there, you take actions usually driven by paying water. You have 3 water. You have the ability to get more water either from abilities, or your water silo will let you carry over water round to round, so you can spend 2 water one turn in order to spend 4 the next, effectively. And then you start playing cards. Cards have a cost. If they're a person, you go ahead and pay that 1 cost over there to place them down into any of your rows, protecting that base from random fire. So I'll go ahead and pay 1 water. I'll put that person down over there. People cannot be activated. You can't use their abilities the turn you play them. But from there, I'll go ahead and I'll actually discard this over here in order to advance my raiders. So this raider over here, this icon lets you either put your raiders into play, you can see that matching icon on the raiders, or alternatively to move the raiders up 1. So I'll go ahead and move the raiders up 1, which means it now resolves, which means my opponent has to choose a base to basically damage. To tap it, it's now damaged. Bases, unlike people, you can utilize their abilities even when damaged. From there, I still have 2 cards, I still have 2 water. Let's go ahead and put an event into play. We're going to put this banish card into play. This event over here, this one we discarded, so let's go ahead and discard that to a common pool. Our raiders reset off to the side, and I'll actually play banish as an event, paying another water, and this will be an event that will trigger in 1 round, at which point I can kill any 1 enemy. We'll put that into play over there, and then lastly, I'll save my last water and draw my water silo. And that's basically a turn. Draw a card, take 3 water, utilize your water for various abilities, and then it's my opponent's turn. I used the wrong cards. My opponent will go ahead and start playing their own cards, and you have all these base abilities you can activate as well. But my opponent will go ahead and damage 1 base. He's going to start by drawing a card. He's going to go ahead and take 3 water, and then we can utilize those abilities. So we're going to start by putting our raiders into play with that. So now our raiders are in play over here, which means in a few rounds they'll start taking out my opponent's bases. From there, I'll go ahead and discard this card. Still haven't spent any water yet. I'll discard this card to deal a damage. That's a damage icon. All icons are listed on this handy-dandy player aid, the other side of the turn order, turn sequencing. I'll go ahead and discard this card for 1 damage to any 1 unprotected card. So I can go ahead and damage this card over here, or I can damage one of the bases. I think I'll go ahead and damage a base because bases are not always open. So I'm going to go ahead and damage this base, rotating it sideways. A second damage would go ahead and kill it. And then I still have 3 mana over there. I have a cool card over here that I really want to spend. I'll spend 2 mana to go ahead and draw a card. 2 water. Mana's a instinctive reaction there. I'll spend 2 water to draw a card, which is an action you can do at any point. And then lastly, I'll go ahead and pick up my water silo with this because I'm going to want 4 water on my next turn for this really cool bombardment card that is super, super cool, but requires 4 water to be spent. Going back and forth until effectively 1 player is dead. You're going to keep playing cards, you're going to activate abilities, you're going to trash cards for their one-time effect, junk cards, you're going to be playing cards to be able to put them into play, you'll be utilizing the abilities of various cards, utilizing the abilities of your bases. You're going to go back and forth until you take out 3 of your opponent's bases before they take out your 3 bases. And that, in a nutshell, is Radlands. As far as the review part of things, starting off with ease of play. The rulebook for this game is fairly short. Like I said already, this sequencing will take you through most of what you need to know. You do still need to go through the rulebook, but the rulebook's fairly short, fairly accessible. It's an easy to learn game, easy to teach game. The setup and tear down, all that, very, very simple. What you see here is what you get. If you have the player mats and the deluxe version of the game, then it will take up a bit more table space. But mostly, this is a fairly accessible game, both in teaching and learning, in game time and table space. The game will run 20-30 minutes. My only real complaint as far as accessibility is there's a lot of terminology that isn't necessarily clear right away, and some of it's not even necessarily clear right away from the rulebook either. And then there's a lot of iconography that has a specific meaning based on the icons, but then when you actually get to the cards themselves, very often they overrule things. So you'll have an icon that says, oh, that deals a damage to any unprotected card. But then you'll have abilities to say that same icon, but to any card instead. So a lot of small little nitpicks around the terminology and the way they can be utilized on the cards, and the way it's not always 100% consistent or 100% clear. Past that, as far as player count, this is a 2-player game. I've played it at 2 players. It's not a 1-player game, it's not a 3-player game, it's a 2-player game only. I've played it at 2 players only so far. And interaction is high. I mean, there's a huge amount of interaction. This is inherently a head-to-head conflict-based game, which means you're basically interacting with the other player quite a bit as you try to tear them down to nothing. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, and Radlands is just lovely. And it's a game I wrote off, to be clear. I'll talk about this more in final thoughts, but Radlands, the art I always knew I liked. This is going to be the art from Manny Tremblay in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. I love it. My wife does not, for context. She does not like post-apocalyptic settings. I generally don't, but the art of Manny Tremblay can make anything pop, and the entire aesthetic of this game is absolutely wonderful. But past that, and more importantly, the game it's fairly quick playing, and a decent amount of strategy as far as what you do and when you do it. That junking cards aspect is a huge part of the game because all these cards are so ridiculously tempting to play it for their intended effect. And the junking effect is often not as good as what you can get if you play it, but it also doesn't cost you any water, which means you can get it out more quickly, or it can be situationally beneficial depending on what you're trying to do. And so the balance of drawing cards, of playing cards, of activating abilities, of activating your base's abilities, of activating your workers, or not workers, your people's abilities, of junking cards. There's a lot of choice in this game, a lot of strategy as far as what pathways you want to pursue, as far as which cards in your hand you're going to try to play for their full effect, versus which cards you're going to junk because they're useful, versus which cards you're going to hold on to for next turn. There are a lot of choices as far as how you react, how you protect yourself, where you place people, which bases you protect. All these things play a lot. It play a lot into the choices you make as you play Radlands. And the variability of the bases is an absolute ton of variability. I mean, the game has basically this giant stack of cards, and then the bases, of which you only have 6 in any given game, we have almost as many cards for bases. There's like 40 bases or something like that here. Just a ton of different options, each giving you some sort of variable way to start the game off. And the base of the game has you drawing 6 bases, and then picking 3 from those bases. Obviously, you can implement whatever you want, as far as you can implement a draft if you wanted to. But the draw 6, play 3 bases lets you choose bases that will cohesively work with your strategy, let you pursue different options, and they're totally different in what they do and how they play out. There was one particular base, I don't even know where it is, but there's one base over here that basically acts as a traveling base. You slowly advance that base up the column until it eventually destroys an opponent's base, which is just completely game-breaking and different in the way it's going to drive your strategy. So while you only see, I mean, these cards you're going to start to cycle and see them a lot more frequently, a lot more common. There's not a ton of variability in these cards, even though the deck is bigger, but the bases are where the variability is going to come in. The bases are where your opportunities and reasons to dive into another game of Radlands will consistently play out, because you will rarely, if ever, have the same setup of bases. So a lot of strategy, a lot of variability over there. As far as what I don't like, there's not a lot that I don't like about Radlands. The biggest thing will be that nitpicking about the lack of clarity in some things, the way some cards, the text and the icons don't always align, the way some terminology I still haven't found. Overall, I would say Radlands is a solid game, but I just wish some of these smaller things were a little bit more consistent for what is otherwise a fairly condensed, set of rules and set of cards and all that. I just wish some small things were cleaned up in that sense. Past that, as far as what I can see others not liking, there's potentially a lot of luck around what you draw, and more specifically as far as how it plays into your strategy. You see, at the beginning of the game, ultimately I think the game comes down to you driving your strategy. You have your bases, you'll have your hand of cards, and then you have to choose how to pivot or react around that. But it's definitely true that at certain points in the game, as you start becoming locked into what happens, drawing the right card at the right time can be a huge thing in terms of winning the game. You can pay your 2 water to go ahead and draw that final card, and then get something that deals damage right when you need it. Meanwhile, I draw an event that won't help me, won't protect me, won't work with what I'm trying to do, and so there is a small amount of luck around what happens. Not a ton of luck, because you're often forced to make the best out of what you have, and how you play the whole game. It can't be blamed to that one instance of luck, but yeah, it can be a factor as far as the luck aspect of the game. And then some cards might seem overpowered. It doesn't really particularly bother me. I don't know if I necessarily know they're overpowered. I mean, I'm like 7 or 8 games deep in this, but there are some cards that definitely seem stronger than others, and drawing those cards or being able to play those cards or getting them at the right time can seem like they're potentially overpowered. As far as final thoughts on Radlands, like I said already, Radlands is a game that surprised me. There's not a lot going on here, which is also why I wrote it off. You see, lane battlers I'm not necessarily a dime a dozen, but good head-to-head lane battling games, there are a lot of them out there. And so when a new one pops up, even when it's by Roxley, who makes Roxley in general makes fantastic games. And so even though it's by Roxley, I just wasn't sure what Radlands was bringing to the table past, a few bases, some powers and abilities, and then a new system that gives you a reason to pick this one over another. And yet something about it is so well done. It is so elegant in what it does. It's so rewarding in the choices you make, in the junking cards versus playing cards, and the variability of the bases, and the simple engine, and the event row as events slowly move up the track. There's a lot going on here, and this is a game that is deceptively deep. It looks very simple on the surface. The rules are very simple, but the amount of back and forth, this is a game that someone who knows the game is going to win over someone who does not know the game. If you pop into this for the first time playing against an experienced player, you will lose. The experienced player will know what they're doing. They'll know how to take advantage. They'll know when to play events, when to hold on to your card, how to build up your hand so you can react to what gets thrown your way as opposed to impulsively throwing things down. If you are an MTG player, and Magic the Gathering player, that aspect, that background is going to come through in this game. Those choices you make that seem simple and yet offer a lot of strategy behind them. Radlands for me is a 4 to 5. It's an excellent game that really surprised me. One that I wrote off as being something that will be totally fine, but is really, really, really solid in what it's doing. As far as other game recommendations, if you like the multi-use card aspect of Radlands, if you like that aspect of delayed gratification versus playing a card now for a quicker reward, 51st State is a fantastic game from Portal Games that gives you a lot of that dual ways to use cards, sometimes 3 ways in fact, as far as how to utilize your cards. And if you're just looking for a simple head-to-head 2-player lane battler that is also deceptively deep, Air, Land, and Sea from Arcane Wonders is a game that I will absolutely swear by. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this helpful, and as always, have a good one.